I want to go back to one of your writings at the time of SARS and 9/11. I know I'm going back in the memory banks. And you mentioned that, quote, fear is a commodity that sells. So now, like them, we perhaps live in a culture of fear. It seems the media amplifies fear, and fear mongers themselves often, are not really challenged in public. Of course, you wrote this years ago, but is it not the same situation we find ourselves in today?
Yeah, absolutely growing. It's a growing phenomenon of, some people call it the weaponizing of fear. Some people call it commodification of fear. Um, generally it's a type of fear mongering, right? The use of fear to manipulate people to vote, to buy your product, to follow you and as a power leader of some kind, etc. So, commodification of fear is an interesting one in terms of a critique of the worst side of predatory capitalism, which basically capitalism in that predatory, unregulated, not in tune with a moral responsibility capitalism, for the most part. What happens is that commodification drive within that capitalist mentality, I'm speaking about really an ideology that it is our savior, that kind of complex implicitly driving a lot of capitalism. This is the way, you know, it's like a type of spiritual religious belief system. That drive of commodifying is basically keeps moving inward and inward and inward. It used to focus most of its attention, the whole commodification, right, capitalizing something for potential sale and gain, on exterior things, and then maybe some services that human bodies can offer to the world, called work or talents and skills and crafts, whatever it might be, entertainment. But when the commodification interest of those in control of commodifying systems and monetizing that commodity, they've now commodified our emotions, our emotional life, our feeling life, our philosophical life, our values life. And once you start seeing that, as they try to get more and more interior. So now they're entering the territory of how can we get humans and commodify their ecological emotional systems from the inside. That's the danger zone, and that commodification of fear, because fear is part of our natural complex. I'm not saying it isn't, but then that becomes part of the constructive idea, where fear is no longer just a feeling and emotion. Fear becomes part of an economic system of utilization, and they wouldn't even normally call it fear. They would just, there's no language for understanding how the experience of fear can be commodified. We don't have a language to even name that fear out there. I have some languages I use, but that would be a complex discussion. You have to move into aesthetics, and I do an aesthetic analysis of fear and fearlessness.
So why are we so mesmerized by fear mongering to the point that we don't denounce it? We should be out there denouncing, hey, this is ridiculous, this is fear mongering, but we don't. Is it we like the comfortable position, or we think it's just like the Roman circus and this is a spectacle? Or what's your perception? So why aren't we more vocal about this?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. Kind of, we could go back to my mother as just one example. As I started the program with, is it's hard sometimes to get the language that fear is actually operating in a weaponized or commodified system of political oppression. In other words, a politics of fear, if you will, some authors say. And sometimes it's hard to get the language and distinctions. And why is it hard? And a lot of the reasons is because we're not educated. So that's where my critique comes in of our education systems. We actually don't teach a really good critical vocabulary of fear. And why do we teach a critical vocabulary, or we're trying to, on sexuality? And I say, well, we need to have the same kind of critical vocabulary on fearuality. So the problem is if people don't have the critical vocabulary, just like to analyze media, right, to have a critical literacy of media, which is so impactful on us today, people don't have the critique. Now, that's one. They don't feel confident. They don't even have the distinctions to notice and make those distinctions. And the other one is they're already in so much fear-based operation of survivalism, they do not want to threaten the system that's giving them the carrots, for being conformist, for doing your job and keeping your mouth shut, don't rock the boat, on and on. That is a huge, huge factor as well on why people don't speak up. And of course, we know some people do speak up, and some people are attacked, and some people are killed, or whatever the case may be. So there is suppression on the part of what I then label the fear matrix. In other words, a society that operates on a fear base. Delameau called it based on sin and guilt in the 13th, 18th century, where his study was. That to me is only increased now to a magnifold since the 18th century. And we're now in the 21st century, and really could be argued like a century of terror on some level could be casted that way, not just a culture of fear or a century of fear, as Albert Camus said for the 20th century. Now we are, I think, in a century of terror, and that's an arguable case. But that doesn't mean, again, that that's all that's going on. And so that's the good news of fearlessness. But that's one couple reasons maybe, Ram, that could start us to think about, yeah, there's good reasons that we don't challenge the very system that's feeding us the carrots. And that system is based on fear as a use of power from elite, powerful forces. Even though, yes, we play into it as citizens and people with maybe not so much power, we still play into it. But we play into it even through that silence, by neglect, by not being well educated, averse for all kinds of reasons, not to blame anybody particular.